Yesterday, we gave you our trade deadline plans for the Mariners. Today, we're going to go over some of the trades that didn't make the cut, or at least ideas we, never fully saw through. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Thursday, July 18th, 2024. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today, we're going to go over some of the other trade ideas we have that didn't make the cut for our deadline plans yesterday. We'll also talk a little bit about the Mariners' upcoming series against the Astros, because tomorrow's episode is all about the draft with Joe Doyle of Future Stars series. But before we get into our show, shout out to our title sponsor today, Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So if you know us, you already know what the deal is here. But if you're new here, Colby and I are sickos when it comes to talking trades. That's our thing. That's our jam here, right? That's our niche here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. So it's safe to say that the trades that you saw yesterday in our deadline plan episode were far from the only trades we had crafted in preparation for that episode. And also just in general, sometimes I'll get bored at night. I'll go on my notes app on my phone, and I'll just come up with trade ideas for list players and try to figure out how it all works. So we're going to go over some of those ideas on this episode. And I want to start with a trade that we kind of hinted at on yesterday's episode. Colby's idea that I did nix. I'll admit it. I did nix, but for a good reason. And I'll explain what that reason is in a moment. But Colby, what was the trade?
Yeah, so after acquiring a couple of bullpen arms in my deadline plan, I had an extra arm in the bullpen. And obviously somebody like Thornton is out of options. Voth is out of options. So, the guy who had options left that made sense to send down the most was Saucedo. And the Mariners like to have two lefties in the bullpen. So basically it was either send down Saucedo and have one lefty in the bullpen or find a way to trade one of these bullpen arms. And I think I found a pretty good partner for that, the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks right now, their bullpen ranks 29th in the league in F4, and they are still, fringy playoff contender right now. So they should be looking to upgrade their bullpen. Obviously, the Mariners aren't likely going to trade Stanek for, whatever a middle relief prospect or whatever a middle reliever gets you in a prospect package for 2 or 3 months, which isn't a ton. They're probably going to want a major leaguer. So is there something Arizona has? Well, Arizona hits pretty well. And they have some outfield depth, and they also have veteran outfielder Randall Grichuk, who's having a really nice year this year. He's a rental, or I think he has a club option though. I think he has a club option, but he could be a rental just like Stanek. The money is not going to be big enough to make a difference one way or another for either of those teams. So I think I look at a guy like Grichuk and I go, well, that's a guy who probably plays 2-3 times a week. If he's swinging the bat well, maybe more. Is he very similar to Victor Robles? I mean, he could be, but he's actually hit for more than, 25 plate appearances or so. So Grichuk slides in nicely off the bench. He can play either corner outfield spot. He hits lefties pretty well. He's got some pop. He's a pretty good bat to add. Mostly a bench bat, sure. But he's kind of in the mold of like, hey, add Tommy Pham, except for this guy is just a little bit better of a ball player at this stage. So I thought Stanek for Grichuk made a lot of sense for both teams. So that's why I like that deal.
So the reason why I nixed it is because to make room for Grichuk, Colby was going to DFA Mitch Haniger and have the Mariners just eat that money, which I live in the world of reality where that's probably not going to happen with John Stanton as the Mariners owner and just that ownership group in general. I fully believe that they are going to be forced to have Mitch Haniger on this roster, at least for the remainder of the season. That's how I operated, and I forced Colby to operate under that assumption as well. Even though that, yes, yesterday, the whole idea of the show was if we were in the Mariners' shoes, this is what we would do. But that just seemed too far to me. I hope they do that. I do hope they do that. They should do that, but I don't think they will. So I had a similar idea, though, in terms of trade a reliever for an outfielder type of deal with a team that's contending. Now, this is a team that's contending on the high end. And the reason that this ultimately, well, there's a couple of reasons that this ultimately didn't make my trade deadline plan. One, it's contingent upon a lot of different things happening. And so there were a lot of holes that you could poke in it. And two, I don't think it makes as much sense now as it did when I first came up with this idea about a month ago. But I'll throw it out there anyway. So the Orioles have Austin Hayes, who got off to a really bad start this year, but has really started to come on as of late. He's back to about a league average bat. It's a 101 WRC plus on the year as a whole. He's crushed lefties, been pretty bad against righties, but crushed lefties. Felt like that was a perfect platoon partner for either Luke Raley or Dom Canzone. And again, this was contingent upon like the Orioles either going like big game hunting and going after Luis Robert, which they absolutely could do if they wanted to, or, just adding another outfielder because like Anthony Santander is a free agent at the end of this year as well. Maybe they want to do something with their outfield, right? Even though they have like Kowser and Kerstad, et cetera. And their bullpen this year, it's been really good. It's one of the better bullpens in baseball. But there are some question marks, especially on the back end. Like Craig Kimbrell has been overall pretty good, but he's been pretty shaky with 1-run leads this year. Cano has regressed this year. So maybe they could use a guy like Ryan Stanek, another like 6th, 7th inning type of arm. Or maybe they would want Trent Thornton, who has a couple of years left of club control beyond this season. So that was kind of the idea. But again, I feel like it probably doesn't make as much sense nowadays, especially now that the Orioles seem to be solely focused on pitching. Seems like they're going to try and make a run at Tariq Skubal. Last time I saw, I think Garrett Crochet makes a lot of sense for them as well. Jack Flaherty, bringing him back to Baltimore makes some sense. So that seems like what they're kind of going to do instead of going after like Robert or whoever. But yeah, what's your next idea?
Yes, this one's from a few weeks ago. It doesn't really make a ton of sense now, but I did have a deal that was going to send Luis Swiespel and Luis Urias to the Tigers for Mark Canha. The idea with Canha is pretty simple. It's very similar to Grichuk. It's a guy who could play, 3 or 4 spots, track record of hitting, crushing lefties, pretty good against righties. It's a very similar idea. The problem with that is that Canha has absolutely gone into the tank over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, and he is really, really struggling right now. So when you factor in the amount of money still owed to him, and when you factor in the, just kind of the overall fit of adding another struggling hitter to your lineup, like that doesn't really do a ton. And, it's one thing if the struggling hitter has like this amazing track record of being like this, plus player, and he can help you other ways, but Canha really can't do that at this stage. He's 35, 36 years old. It wouldn't be a bad addition, even though he's struggling right now, but
dude, he's cratered. It's insane. Because the last time I had looked at Mark Canha, I think it was about a month and a half ago. He was running like a 120 something WRC plus. It's now down to 96.
Right.
I'll have to look at his game log to see like where things went sideways. But yeah, it's been,
that's a lot of ground to lose in a month. So yeah. That's a red flag. And obviously his age is also a red flag in his remaining salary, although it would have been half of what it is. And obviously Urias is in there to kind of, even out that salary a bit. It's still probably better off just going and getting a Grichuk or going out and getting a Pham type, somebody who's still hitting a little bit right now and is probably going to be cheaper just in terms of money because we do know that,
you have too many guys that you're already hoping are going to turn it around. Like you need someone that's hitting right now. By the way, Canha since June 1st, 194, 294, 241, 59 WRC plus. Yikes.
Yeah. That's why I pivoted to Ibanez.
Yeah. So, all right. I got a couple other ideas, or we have a couple of other ideas to go over here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Stitch Fix and Tax Network USA. You know that instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? That is what I get with Stitch Fix. Easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. Then I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And they send 5 just for me pieces plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. I keep what works and send back the rest. And if you don't love something, just send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Now is the best time to get started at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $100 off. That's $25 off your first 4 fixes for a limited time only. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $100 off. Stitchfix.com/MLB. Must redeem within 7 days of sign up. Offer does not include kids fixes. Here on Locked On Mariners, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000. That's 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/locked on. See the link in this episode description. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Mariners will kick off the second half of the season tomorrow night against the Astros. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. We'll be talking about that series a little later on in this episode, but let's continue on with our other trade ideas that did not make the cut for our trade deadline plans that we rolled out on yesterday's episode. If you haven't watched that or listened to that yet, go check that out. Think you'll enjoy it. All right. So I had another idea with the Cubs. This was around the time that the Nico Hoerner thing became a thing, essentially. I forget who brought that up. It was like someone on the Cubs side, right? And then we ended up doing an episode about it. And Nico Hoerner makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if the Cubs will actually trade him or not. Feel like the answer is probably not, at least not at the deadline. Maybe this offseason, we'll see. But the Hoerner idea that I had was Hoerner, Andrew Smiley for Ryan Bliss. I'm going to try and remember it off top because I think I deleted it from my notes app. I tried to find it earlier today, but it was Ryan Bliss, Brandon Garcia, someone else. I forget who. And then Jorge Polanco. And the reason Polanco's involved in the deal was because him and Drew Smiley are making the same exact amount of money this year, and they both have club options. Or well, no, Smiley has a mutual option this winter, but Polanco has a club option, which is $750,000. Smiley's is Polanco's buyout is $750,000. Smiley's buyout is like $2.5 million or something like that. So you would also have to have the Cubs throw in some money to make up the difference on that front. But yeah, that was the general idea. And a lot of it is predicated on they think Ryan Bliss can actually start, and they kind of want to reset their timeline at second base. Brandon Garcia. Oh, it was Michael Arroyo. That's who else was in the deal. So it was Bliss, Arroyo, and Brandon Garcia, as well as Polanco to even out the money with Smiley. So yeah, it's a lot of it predicated on them thinking that they can reset their timeline at second base. They also get a solid pitching prospect in Garcia, who's already in Double-A, could make his debut as soon as sometime next year. And then Arroyo, who's answered a lot of questions this year in terms of the power output so far. So has kind of raised his stock, I would think, as a prospect. So I think that's a solid deal for 2 years of Nico Hoerner, and then a couple of months of Drew Smyly, who can start for you, also pitch out of the bullpen. So that gives you some Brian Wu insurance. So yeah, that was the general idea behind that. But again, I think Hoerner's probably not getting traded this month.
So yeah, that's interesting. Feels light. Again, it's tough to know how the Cubs are going to value Hoerner, and obviously we're guessing. Like maybe the Cubs hate Ryan Bliss. Like they think he's a 4A guy. Then obviously that deal's not going to work. So. There is some guesswork involved here, but Hoerner is definitely a guy that I would like the Mariners to add, even though he's struggled a little bit, and I believe his WRC plus has dipped below 100. Still, huge upgrade defensively and on the bases and all that. So, and Smyly, I like having that kind of 6 starter long guy type of idea.
And by the way, a WRC plus somewhere in the 90s, still a lot better than Jorge Polanco right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
So interesting.
So what other ideas do you have, if any?
My last one is also with the Diamondbacks, ironically enough. It was in my original offseason plan. I kind of tweaked it a little bit because I found a bat that I like more or I found a different player that I like a little bit more. And that was in my actual plan. But in this one, I was going to trade Dominic Canzone, Trent Thornton, and Teddy McGraw to the Diamondbacks for Paul Sewald and Jock Peterson. Now, since I wrote this at the beginning of the month, Paul Sewald has gone in the tank. He blew 3 saves in a row. Like he's really struggling right now.
Clearly lowering his trade value, so he's cheaper for the Mariners to acquire.
Right. Obviously, we know about Paul Sewald. Like we know he is. Somehow he's going to throw 93 and miss a ton of bats, but not as many as he used to. Like Sewald is definitely on the downslope of his career here, but he's still going to help this bullpen, and he's still going to give you a trustworthy option in the back end of games that Scott's definitely going to feel comfortable going to. And obviously, Jock Peterson, he's a 2-month rental. He cannot hit lefties. He really cannot play the field, but he crushes right-handed pitching, destroys it. And against righties, he probably is hitting 3 or 4 for you. So, yeah, I like Peterson quite a bit as a fit in Seattle. And obviously, we all love Paul. The idea here behind the package is Canzone and Thornton give the Diamondbacks 2 players who basically replace the 2 that they're giving up, but they get more club control out of it. They get out from what they owe Sewald the rest of the way, so they save a little bit of money, and they get an interesting arm, kind of a fun lottery ticket to take a shot on in Teddy McGraw. So essentially, the Mariners trade 6 years of Canzone for 2 months of Peterson. They trade 1.5 years of Thornton for 2 months of Paul Sewald. And then they also give up, Teddy McGraw, who certainly has upside. There's a lot to be excited about for McGraw, but he hasn't pitched in pro ball yet. He's still working his way back from an injury. Now after the draft, the Mariners have added quite a few arms to their farm system. So maybe, just maybe, they're more willing to trade off of somebody like Teddy McGraw to kind of basically swap club control for impact talent now, where the 2 players you're giving up, you kind of hope that they turn into the guys that you're getting for a couple months.
I did see a guy get thrown out a couple of times in the comments section of yesterday's episode. And that's someone that we've talked about a lot, but didn't wind up on our plans. We haven't talked about it all on this episode. Brent Rooker of the Oakland A's, who I know you've thought a lot about. Why didn't he end up in your plan? Why haven't we talked about him much lately? And what do you think it would ultimately cost to land Rooker, who was one of the biggest snubs from the All-Star game, by the way? I mean, he's been one of the best hitters in baseball this year, and the fact that guy wasn't in Texas this on Tuesday is kind of a crime in its own right, but whatever. So yeah, what do you think about Rooker? What's he going to cost, and all that?
Yeah, Rooker is the guy I like, obviously, but there's just a lot of uncertainty as to what the A's are going to ask for Rooker, and Rooker is a DH only. He could stand in left field or right field, but you don't really want him to. He's better than Haniger, but that's not saying anything. He played first base a little bit, so he's probably better than France, or at least as good as France there defensively. So, but you want him to DH. That's where you want him. There's swing and miss concerns there, which obviously the Mariners are kind of trying to minimize a little bit, but that would just be another swing and miss guy. And yeah, there's the lack of defensive and base running value. And the fact that he's got 4 years left after this year, 4 or 3, whatever, you get him for a while. I'm not sure what that's going to cost. And I'm not sure if the A's are going to be reasonable in this down market. So for me, the reason why Rooker is kind of, on the back burner here is that I just don't have a good feel for what he would cost, Seattle at all. I don't know if there's going to be a division tax or anything like that. I don't know if the A's are even willing to move him. They should be. They absolutely should be. But it doesn't sound like the A's are like seriously shopping him, at least as of yet. They are a team that has been have been sellers for the last, 18 months, but certainly they have been all year, and they are now. And yet we haven't heard really anybody all that connected to Rooker, with the exception of the Phillies. So yeah, to me, it's just a question of like, how are they going to value him, and are the Mariners going to see eye to eye in that? And I don't know, because for all I know, the A's are like, yeah, give us what you were going to give the White Sox for Luis Robert. And like, no, Robert's the better player. And so for me, it was just too hard to kind of nail down a price tag that makes sense for Seattle, that I think Oakland would do. But he's definitely on the list. Like, he's definitely on the radar. But it's just a little bit of a tight fit. And then you add on top of that the questions about, what is it going to cost? That's why Rooker wasn't on my list.
Yeah. I feel like he's going to end up with the Phillies, and that's just based off of vibes. There was also a report that they are interested in him. He just makes a lot of sense, especially for, like, the Phillies don't care about outfield defense. They love guys that just hit dingers. Brent Rooker makes a ton of sense for the Philadelphia Phillies. So I figure he's just going to end up going there. Maybe with Mason Miller as well, who ended up taking the Phillies jet to the All-Star game a couple of days ago, which is hilarious. All right. So those are some of our other trade ideas. Since there wasn't a Fan Fiction Friday this week, let us know what your trade ideas are in the comments below. We'd love to see them. All right, let's get into the Mariners' upcoming series with the Astros. We've got pitching probables to talk about. And obviously, this is just, in general, the biggest series of the year so far for the Mariners. Go over all that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Booking.com and Game Time. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, I'm talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Even a Mariners fan can have a great time down in Houston, whether you're watching Cal Raleigh hit one into the Crawford boxes or chowing down on some authentic Texas barbecue. Maybe you're doing both at the same time. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or the Booking.com app. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier.
Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, and I get to see the view of every seat in the house, so I know exactly what I'm buying. Game Time's last minute deals give you up to 60% in savings buying last minute for sports, music, comedy, and more. And to avoid any surprises at checkout, you can turn on their all-in pricing to see the full cost, fees included. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, Mariners will kick off the second half of the season tomorrow night against the Astros. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So let's talk about it. We've got pitching probables, folks. Tomorrow, it is going to be Hunter Brown against Luis Castillo. Saturday, Framber Valdez against George Kirby. Sunday, Renel Blanco, speaking of all-star snubs, against Brian Wu. No Logan Gilbert. Pretty surprising. Obviously, he did pitch the last game of the first half of the season for the Mariners, but I could definitely wrap that around my head, pitching him in the series. Are you surprised that he's not, and that the Mariners are essentially just kind of staying within rotation?
Yeah, a little bit. The thing with Logan is that he's thrown a ton of innings, in the first half. So if you have this opportunity to give him what will end up being a full week's rest between starts, maybe that's something that you value a little bit here. But I do feel like, pretty like put him in whatever order you want, but Castillo, Kirby, and Logan should be starting these 3 games. So the fact that, Wu is getting the start in the last game of the series, it's a little weird to me. Now, obviously, there's other factors in play. It's not just about Logan. You have to get Wu. Wu hasn't pitched a ton in the last few weeks. So how long do you want to, keep him on the sidelines before he has to go back out there and ramp it up again?
Yeah.
So,
and he obviously talked about rust being a factor and how much he struggled in Anaheim as well. So, yeah.
Right. So there's a little bit of a X factor to consider, but yeah, I am surprised that it's not Logan because he pitched on Sunday. So by Friday he would be at full rest. So he could start game 1 in theory. And if they don't want to do that, they want to give him a couple extra days out of the break. That's fine. Cool. No problem. Probably should be pitching Sunday, but it makes Friday and Saturday that much more important because we don't know what you're going to get out of Brian Wu, particularly against this lineup. So we'll see how it goes. I'm surprised, but there are other factors to consider when you kind of try and piece together why they made this decision. And for all we know, they've counted out the days, up until the end of the year, and maybe Gilbert misses the Astros this time, but maybe Gilbert faces, key teams down the stretch more because they slotted him 4th or 5th or whatever out of the break. So
64 games to go. Your lead in the ALS is basically negligible. It's a 1-game lead. You're basically at square one again here. It's essentially just a new season that's beginning on Friday. Hopefully that's what it looks like for the Mariners offense, but overall, just general thoughts heading into the second half of the season for the Mariners.
Time to step up and go win this thing. You got to the deadline, or you got to the break in first place, and kind of regardless of how it happened, you're there. Like, all those games count. The Astros' poor start counts. It's affecting them. The Mariners' really poor month of July counts. It's affecting them right now, but it's all kind of washed away. You have a 64-game sprint to the end. This is where you want to be. This is where you want to be in first place at the break. And again, it doesn't really matter how it happens, so long as you're there, so long as you get there. And now it's just, it goes from a marathon to a little bit of a sprint. We're on the back end. We're on the back, almost on the back third of this thing. And so it's time now to step up, start playing better ball. Hopefully, the break, and then coming out of the break and facing the team that's chasing you in the division is, a good combination of factors that kind of helps the Mariners click into gear here. But ultimately, until they start to hit with some more consistency, it's tough to know. It's tough to feel great about it. They have to start hitting with more consistency, and it's hard to see them hitting with more consistency without them making some fairly significant changes over the next 12 days. So we'll see what they're able to do on that end of things. But it's going to be a race to the finish. The Mariners' back end of the schedule in terms of days off is more favorable than Houston's. So we'll see if that plays a factor. And we'll see what these teams do at the deadline. And, Texas is kind of lurking in third place right now. Mm-hmm. It's a big couple of weeks for the Rangers as to whether or not they're going to buy or sell at the deadline. So the next 10 days will probably tell us everything we need to know about, is this a 2-team race or is this a 3-team race? So we'll have to see. But the Mariners overall still in pretty good position. They do have that 1-game buffer. They have won 5 of the 7 matchups against the Astros this year. So they just need 2 more to get that really valuable, tiebreaker in their back pocket. The race to 7 is pretty valuable. And you just look at it even last year where the tiebreakers and how they would have worked out for Seattle had they gotten to that spot, it would have made a difference. So, winning 2 of your final 6 games against the Astros would be huge. And obviously you want to win more than that, but if you win at least 2, then you have a game in your back pocket that that Houston has to take from you. Essentially, they have to steal that win from you, that extra game from you. It's go time. You got to play well. You got to focus up a little bit. None of those silly mistakes, none of the whiffs on relay throws, and none of the poor throws after you bobble the ball. Like you got to sharpen up here. You got to stay with it. And it's 64 games to go and accomplish everything you want to accomplish. There's nothing that you wanted to do in March that you still cannot do. And that's where we wanted to be. So sucks that it went from 10 games to 1, but that is what it is. And you're still in pretty good position to, accomplish all your goals from, 3-4 months ago.
Tomorrow, we're going to talk to Joe Doyle of Future Star Series, talk all about the Mariners draft class. We're actually going to be recording that tonight, probably recording that as you're watching this. So look forward to that. But that's going to do it for our show today. Before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.